The television courtroom had never seen such blatant, unrestrained disrespect from someone so young. 12-year-old Tyler Mason strolled into Judge Judy's courtroom, AirPods Max snug over his ears, his latest iPhone glowing in his hands, and a face full of boredom that screamed he would rather be anywhere else on Earth. His designer sneakers, worth more than some families' monthly car payments, squeaked across the polished floor as he slouched toward the defendant's table, barely sparing a glance at the elderly woman whose life he had deliberately appended for TikTok views. What unfolded in the following 8 minutes would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared over 80 million times across every social media platform imaginable. Judge Judy's response turned into a rallying cry for parents, teachers, and anyone who still believed in consequences in a world where kids often seemed untouchable. But here's what makes this story truly mind-blowing. Tyler didn't just get a lecture. He didn't simply lose the case. What Judge Judy did to this entitled 12-year-old was devastatingly precise, righteously furious, and perfectly aimed to strike exactly where it would hurt the most. Her words silenced Tyler, his enabling mother, the entire courtroom, and eventually millions of viewers who could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The disrespect Tyler showed to a decorated judge with 35 years of experience provoked a response that would be studied in parenting courses, shared in teacher lounges, and cited in therapy sessions for years to come. Judge Judy didn't merely rule against him. She delivered a masterclass in accountability that had the potential to completely alter the trajectory of this kid's life. Before we reveal the exact moment Tyler called Judge Judy a Karen to her face and accused her of having boomer energy, it's essential to understand who these people were and what led to this explosive confrontation. Because this wasn't just about a single disrespectful remark or one ruined garden. This was a pattern, a behavior that had escalated over years, enabled by a mother too afraid to enforce boundaries, and directed at vulnerable people who symbolized everything wrong with how Tyler had been allowed to navigate the world without ever facing real consequences. Smash that like button right now if you think kids should be taught respect and parents need to actually parent instead of trying to be their child's best friend. Hit subscribe because what Judge Judy uncovers about Tyler's repeated behavior will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, the next 20 minutes will restore your belief that karma is real, and sometimes it comes wearing a judge's robe with zero tolerance for entitled attitudes. Tyler Mason was the perfect example of what happens when modern parenting goes wrong. At just 12 years old, he had a TikTok account boasting 50,000 followers, built entirely on videos mocking adults, disrespecting authority, and celebrating antics that previous generations would have earned months of grounding for. His single mother, Jennifer Mason, had spent the 3 years since her divorce desperately trying to be the cool parent, the understanding parent, the one who treated her son like a friend rather than a child in need of limits, discipline, and consequences. Jennifer worked as a marketing coordinator and earned a decent living, which she spent generously on Tyler, buying him every new gadget, every pricey pair of sneakers, every item he demanded, because saying no felt too much like conflict, and conflict reminded her too painfully of her failed marriage. Tyler's life was a world without accountability. When he talked back to teachers, Jennifer defended him and blamed the schools. When he faced 4 suspensions in just 2 years, she argued that schools didn't understand creative kids. When neighbors complained about his behavior, she dismissed them as overly sensitive and told Tyler to ignore the critics, using the same words he used about negative TikTok comments. Over the past 18 months, she had already paid out $6,700 to 3 neighbors to make problems disappear, keeping Tyler free from any legal consequences and maintaining the illusion that her parenting style was working. But it wasn't. Tyler was growing increasingly entitled, more aggressive, and more convinced that his social media following made him important, that adults were obstacles to ridicule, and that consequences were for other people. The person who would finally change everything was Eleanor Rodriguez, a 72-year-old retired teacher who lived next door to the Masons. She had spent 30 years nurturing a garden that was her pride, joy, and living tribute to her late husband. Eleanor represented everything beautiful about patience, dedication, and love that outlasts even death. Her garden was more than just plants. It was a living museum of her 40-year marriage to Eduardo Rodriguez, who had passed away from cancer 3 years prior. Eduardo had planted the first rose bushes the week they moved into their modest home in 1983, working the soil with his bare hands because they couldn't afford proper gardening tools yet. Over 4 decades, that garden had grown into something truly extraordinary. Eduardo had cultivated rare varieties from cuttings, roses in shades most people had never even imagined, specimens that professional horticulturists had once offered thousands of dollars for. Eleanor had always refused to sell. These flowers weren't mere plants. They were Eduardo's legacy, her daily bridge to the man she had loved since she was 17, the reason she rose each morning to tend to something that depended on her care. Mrs. Rodriguez lived on a fixed income from Eduardo's pension and her modest teacher's retirement. Every cent was carefully accounted for. Her car was a 19-year-old Honda Civic, lovingly maintained by Eduardo before illness struck. She clipped coupons, shopped sales, and wore dresses she had owned for decades because they still fit and looked presentable. But her garden received whatever it required. Special soil amendments, organic fertilizers, and the precise watering systems Eduardo had installed before he could no longer work outside. Every morning, she spent 3 hours there, pruning, watering, fertilizing, speaking to Eduardo as she went, sharing the details of her day, asking for guidance on life's problems, keeping their conversation alive, even if now it was only one way. Neighbors understood never to disturb Mrs. Rodriguez before 10 o'clock. Those hours with Eduardo were sacred, inviolate. Tyler Mason had moved in next door a year earlier after his mother purchased the house amid a divorce. Initially, the disruption was minimal. The occasional loud music, the typical clamor of a kid, nothing that truly bothered Mrs. Rodriguez. After 30 years as a middle school teacher, she understood that children had energy and noise. But over the months, Tyler's behavior escalated, each incident more deliberate and hurtful than the last. It began with bouncing basketballs against a shared fence during her morning garden time, shattering her peaceful hours with Eduardo. When she politely asked him to play later in the day, he laughed and only increased the interruptions. Then came the trash, handfuls of garbage tossed into her flower beds, leaving her to spend hours picking debris from her plants. The harassment grew crueler when Tyler targeted Mrs. Rodriguez's slight accent, her Spanish-inflected English, despite having lived in America for 52 years and speaking perfectly. He filmed her without permission, mocking her pronunciation, exaggerating her accent in TikTok videos with captions like, "My crazy neighbor," or "Why are old people so weird?" Mrs. Rodriguez, who had spent 15 years teaching English as a second language and helping hundreds of immigrant children succeed, now found herself ridiculed for the very accent she had spent decades softening. She tried speaking to Jennifer Mason about Tyler's actions. Jennifer offered vague apologies, promised to address the issue, and did nothing. The videos continued. The harassment intensified. Then came the morning that changed everything. At 6:30, Mrs. Rodriguez rose as usual, made her coffee, and stepped outside to begin her morning routine with Eduardo. What she discovered shattered something deep within her, something that had endured even after her husband's death. Her roses, her exquisite, irreplaceable roses, were gone. Not naturally withered, not sick or dying of neglect, but chemically obliterated. Someone had deliberately drenched each and every rose bush in her garden with industrial-strength weed killer. 40 years of meticulous cultivation, Eduardo's living legacy, decades of tender care and devotion, reduced to charred stems and crumbling petals. The devastation was both intentional and merciless. It was clear that whoever did this had taken their time, ensuring that every single plant received a fatal dose. Mrs. Rodriguez sank to her knees amidst the ruined garden, encircled by Eduardo's dying roses, and wept in a way she hadn't since the morning he passed away in their bedroom 3 years prior. She might never have discovered the culprit, if not for Tyler's monumental blunder, an act of arrogance that defined him as much as it doomed him. He had recorded himself committing the act, uploaded the footage to TikTok with the caption, "Pranking my annoying neighbor. Old people are so easy to troll," followed by laughing emojis. The video showed him scaling the fence under the cover of night, methodically poisoning every rose bush while narrating each step, like a whimsical nature documentary, chuckling about how Mrs. Rodriguez would break down when she saw her beloved flowers destroyed. 50,000 followers watched. Hundreds flooded the comments with laughing emojis, fire emojis, and praise for what they called an epic prank. 3 people who knew Mrs. Rodriguez were horrified enough to send her screenshots. And in that moment, Mrs. Rodriguez did something unprecedented in her 72 years. She filed a lawsuit. Eduardo had always resolved conflicts through conversation, reason, and compromise. She had inherited that philosophy. living it through decades of teaching difficult students, negotiating with challenging parents, and navigating the intricacies of public education. But this wasn't something words could mend. Tyler had committed a crime, recorded himself doing it, and had faced no consequences from his mother. The police report she filed brought juvenile probation officers into the mix, but the real reckoning would come in small claims court. She sued for $2,400 to replace her annihilated roses and $800 for the emotional toll of losing something irreplaceable. She had consulted 3 separate horticulturists, all of whom confirmed that roses of that age and rarity could not truly be replaced. The 40-year-old root systems produced blooms that new plants simply couldn't replicate, meaning her claim was, in fact, a significant undervaluation of her loss. What Mrs. Rodriguez didn't know was that Judge Judy Shinlin's research team had gone far beyond the surface details of the case. When Tyler Mason's name appeared on her desk, something in her instincts, sharpened over 25 years as a family court judge in Manhattan, handling more than 20,000 cases, clicked. She assigned her team to investigate every facet of Tyler's life. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture, a pattern of escalating behavior, continually enabled and concealed by a mother too fearful to enforce boundaries. They unearthed 3 prior incidents with other neighbors, all of which Jennifer had paid to vanish. They uncovered school records documenting suspensions, psychological evaluations urging intervention, and teachers' notes detailing escalating aggressive behavior. They retrieved Tyler's entire social media footprint, including videos he thought he had erased, revealing a disturbing pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals for content. Judge Judy had spent 3 nights poring over the evidence, and when she entered the courtroom, she carried a rare emotion she seldom experienced after decades of witnessing humanity at its worst. She was genuinely furious. The courtroom hummed with its usual energy as cameras rolled, capturing what everyone assumed would be just another ordinary small claims case. The audience settled into their seats, mostly retirees who had followed Judge Judy religiously for years, eager to see entitled individuals finally held accountable. Production assistants made last-minute adjustments, and the bailiff assumed his position near the bench. No one in that room had any idea they were about to witness a moment that would later be dissected in parenting classes and shared across millions of screens as a textbook example of what happens when someone who thinks they're untouchable finally faces consequences. Mrs. Rodriguez entered first, her movements careful and deliberate, the slow steps of someone whose knees ached from decades spent tending to gardens. She wore her Sunday best, a modest floral dress from JCPenney purchased 15 years ago, still impeccably maintained because quality pieces last when treated with care. Her daughter walked beside her, offering support and carrying a folder of evidence that included photos of the garden before and after, printouts of Tyler's TikTok video, statements from horticulturists, and pictures of Eduardo planting the first roses back in 1983. Then Tyler and Jennifer Mason appeared, and the energy in the courtroom shifted instantly. Tyler entered with the casual swagger of someone strolling through a shopping mall. His AirPods Max shielded him from the world, his phone held at eye level as he scrolled, probably on TikTok, utterly unaware of the courtroom's solemnity or the seriousness of why he was there. He ignored the bailiff, didn't glance toward Mrs. Rodriguez seated 20 feet away, and seemed oblivious to the reality that decorum and respect actually mattered here. Jennifer Mason followed, dressed in a professional blazer and slacks, her expression tense, the look of someone who understood the gravity of the situation but had long since lost control over her son. She reached out repeatedly, trying to guide Tyler to put his phone down, sit upright, and project even a hint of parental authority. Tyler shrugged off every attempt to engage him. His posture and gestures screamed disregard for his mother, indifference toward the proceedings, and complete obliviousness to the fact that he was about to face someone who had spent 35 years dismantling people just like him. Judge Judy observed his entrance with the calm, patient gaze of a predator sizing up prey, noting every flick of Tyler's body language, every dismissive motion, every hint of entitlement that had landed him in her courtroom. She had watched thousands of defendants pass through those doors, but something about this 12-year-old triggered every instinct she had honed over decades for spotting those in need of a hard lesson. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Judy leaned slightly forward in her chair, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, the expression seasoned viewers knew signaled the calm before a storm. She had formed her judgment within the first 30 seconds and was now poised to methodically strip away the facade of this spoiled child who believed his social media following made him significant. Opening the proceedings with her trademark precision, her voice sliced through the courtroom like a scalpel. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you are suing Tyler Mason for $3,200 in property damages. Tell me exactly what happened." Her tone was professional, but carried a quiet undertone suggesting she already understood far more than the surface facts revealed. Mrs. Rodriguez began her testimony with visible emotion, her voice trembling as she recounted the garden Eduardo had cultivated for 40 years. She explained how those roses symbolized their entire married life, how she spoke to her late husband each morning while tending the plants he cherished. She displayed the photographs, the before images revealing a garden of breathtaking beauty, the rare blooms striking in their vivid, almost unnatural colors. The after images showed blackened stems and shriveled petals, the result of deliberate destruction. Then she played Tyler's TikTok video on the courtroom screen, and the audience collectively gasped. In it, a 12-year-old narrated the deliberate ruination of an elderly woman's treasure garden, laughing at the thought of her distress. Throughout her testimony, Tyler slouched in his chair, one AirPod still in his ear, his phone resting on his lap, just below the table where he thought Judge Judy couldn't see it. His face revealed no remorse, no empathy, no understanding that he had caused genuine harm. He rolled his eyes as Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cracked, sighed loudly when she described Eduardo planting each rose bush by hand, and muttered under his breath something barely audible through the microphones, but clearly mocking, so dramatic, as she explained that some plants could never be replaced. Jennifer Mason kept nudging him, whispering urgently for him to sit up straight, behave respectfully, and just make it through the next 20 minutes without incident. Tyler ignored every parental prompt, his posture, and gestures broadcasting loudly to the courtroom that he neither respected his mother nor cared about any consequences. Judge Judy's first direct words to Tyler carried a deceptive calm. Anyone who knew her style recognized it as a sharp warning. "Young man, put the phone away now." Tyler responded with an exaggerated sigh, the kind of theatrical annoyance a teenager shows when asked to do the simplest chore, and then deliberately slid the phone into his pocket in a way that screamed disrespect while technically obeying the instruction. He removed one AirPod, leaving the other dangling around his neck, a subtle rebellion, signaling that he would follow the literal rule, but not its intention. Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted just slightly, the first visible sign that she was mentally noting this defiance and adding it to her growing tally of lessons he desperately needed to learn. Jennifer Mason dove into her defense, her voice tinged with desperation, knowing the odds were against her but compelled to try anyway. "Your Honor, Tyler is fundamentally a good boy who made a poor choice. Mrs. Rodriguez is understandably upset, but I think the importance of these roses is a bit overstated. They're just plants, we can replace them." Tyler didn't realize how much they meant to her. He's only 12. He doesn't fully understand consequences yet. He thought it was a harmless social media prank. Kids today see the world differently. I've already disciplined him at home. We've talked at length about respect and property. I truly believe we can resolve this reasonably without a huge financial penalty. Each word Jennifer spoke only worsened the perception. Every excuse made it clear that she had spent years excusing her son's behavior, teaching him that rules were flexible, and youth granted immunity from accountability. Judge Judy's reply was immediate, precise, and unyielding. "Ma'am, at 12 years old, children absolutely understand right from wrong. They know that damaging someone's property is wrong. They know that causing someone pain is wrong. Your son didn't just understand what he was doing, he filmed it. He posted it online. He laughed while making an elderly woman cry. This wasn't a prank. This was deliberate cruelty for amusement." Then, Judge Judy turned her full gaze on Tyler, her voice heavy with the authority of 35 years on the bench. "Young man, look at me when I'm speaking to you." Tyler finally lifted his eyes from his lap, where his hand had unconsciously drifted toward the phone. He met Judge Judy's eyes with a mixture of boredom and mild irritation, as though this entire proceeding were an inconvenient disruption to his day. Judge Judy asked the question that would silence the room and change everything. "Do you understand that what you did was wrong?" Tyler answered with the casual indifference of someone unaccustomed to real consequences and convinced he never would face any. "I mean, it's literally just flowers. She can buy more. It's not that big of a deal." The courtroom collectively gasped. Jennifer shut her eyes tightly, as if sheer willpower could erase this unbearable moment. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter reached over to clasp her mother's hand, tears brimming in the elderly woman's eyes. Judge Judy's face hardened into an expression so sharp that the bailiff instinctively straightened in his stance. "Not that deep," she repeated, her voice sinking into that chillingly quiet tone she reserved for moments when words alone weren't enough. "You've destroyed something irreplaceable, and you think it's not that deep." Tyler, confident from 12 years of getting away with everything, shrugged and delivered the line that would seal his fate. "Whatever. Boomers are so dramatic about everything." For a moment, time in the courtroom seemed to freeze, the air thick with disbelief. Judge Judy slowly rose from her chair, a movement she reserved for moments when the situation surpassed ordinary judicial decorum and demanded full physical emphasis. Each measured step stretched on, every second resonating with the gravity of what was unfolding. Everyone in the courtroom sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. When she finally spoke, her voice was icy calm, the kind of calm that comes just before total obliteration. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Tyler, misreading the gravity with the arrogance of someone who had bullied every authority figure in his life, doubled down on his disrespect. "I said, boomers are dramatic. Like, you're all the same, getting mad over nothing. It's giving Karen energy." He even smirked at the camera, convinced he had just landed a viral insult that his TikTok followers would applaud when this aired. Judge Judy's response began with words destined to echo in parenting guides and therapy sessions for years. "Young man, let me explain what I understand. I understand that you're 12 years old and already on a path to becoming someone no one will want to be around. I understand that your mother has failed you by never teaching you that actions have consequences. I understand that you think your social media followers make you important, but they don't. They're watching you fail, and the moment they're bored, they'll move on." She paused, letting each word hang in the air before continuing with growing intensity. "What you don't understand is this: you are not special. You are not unique. You are a child who has been allowed to act like a tyrant, and that ends today in my courtroom. You destroyed something precious because you thought it was funny. You mocked an elderly woman who did nothing to you except live near your property. You have shown no remorse, no empathy, and no respect, none whatsoever." Tyler's confident smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by the first genuine fear he had likely experienced in years. His face drained of color as Judge Judy methodically tore apart his entire sense of self and worldview. She presented the findings her team had painstakingly gathered, the 3 earlier incidents with neighbors that his mother had paid to cover up, the $6,700 spent suppressing his misconduct, the school records showing worsening behavior, and the psychological evaluations that advised intervention, evaluations Jennifer had blatantly ignored. Each disclosure landed on Jennifer like a punch, as she realized Judge Judy had uncovered everything, examined everything, and was about to hand down consequences money and excuses couldn't erase. Tyler remained motionless as Judge Judy meticulously explained the true significance of the 40-year-old roses, how Eduardo Rodriguez had planted them while battling cancer, how some were cuttings from Mrs. Rodriguez's childhood home in Mexico, carrying the weight of her entire family history. Their market value of $2,400 was trivial compared to their irreplaceable personal worth. Then came the verdict that would forever alter Tyler's life. Judge Judy granted Mrs. Rodriguez the full $3,200 she requested, the maximum permissible in small claims court. But the judge didn't stop there. She imposed conditions that left Tyler's face crumpled in despair. He would personally restore Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, dedicating 40 hours across 10 consecutive Saturdays under the supervision of a court-appointed mediator. No phones would be allowed during this service. He was required to write a formal, handwritten apology with no digital assistance. His TikTok account would be permanently deleted, with all content featuring Mrs. Rodriguez removed immediately. He would be prohibited from all social media for 6 months, with the court monitoring his compliance. Jennifer would be responsible for enforcing these rules or face contempt of court charges herself. The punishment was perfectly tailored to strike Tyler where it hurt most, stripping away the social media validation that had become the core of his identity and forcing him into direct accountability with the woman he had harmed. Tyler's response was instant and raw. Tears poured down his cheeks as he cried out that this was unfair, insisting that Judge Judy couldn't take away his account, that his followers actually cared about him. The irony was sharp. This was the first genuine emotion he'd shown throughout the entire proceeding, and it was triggered by losing his TikTok account, not by harming anyone else. Jennifer broke down entirely, sobbing that all she wanted was for her son to like her, admitting she didn't know how to play the bad guy, and insisting she had tried her hardest. Judge Judy's reply was slightly softer in tone, but no less truthful. He doesn't need a buddy. He needs a parent. You've been enabling this behavior, and that ends today. When Tyler attempted one last protest, yelling that Judge Judy was too old to understand, she cut him off with unshakable authority. Sit down and be quiet. You're about to learn that the real world doesn't care about your followers. It doesn't care about your excuses, and it certainly doesn't care about your attitude. You're going to spend 40 hours rebuilding what you've destroyed. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand that respect isn't demanded. It's earned by showing it to others first. Case dismissed. Get out of my courtroom. The silence that followed was heavy and total. 5 full seconds of absolute quiet before the audience erupted into a standing ovation. Tyler was led out by his mother, crushed with genuine shame for perhaps the first time in his life. The clip went viral within hours, racking up 80 million views and becoming the most-watched Judge Judy moment ever. But the real story unfolded over the next 10 Saturdays in Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, where Tyler slowly transformed from entitled brat to a young man who finally grasped that actions have consequences, that people's worth extends far beyond social media, and that sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is force you to face the truth about yourself. By the final Saturday, Tyler was asking Mrs. Rodriguez to teach him Spanish as she taught him about roses. And an unlikely friendship blossomed between a 12-year-old learning empathy and a 72-year-old woman who still believed broken children could be healed with patience, boundaries, and love.